"I speak 6 languages," said the beggar girl. Arab Billionaire laughed, but she silenced him. "Before we continue, please comment on which city you are watching from." The 73rd floor of the Al Farouk Tower pierced through Manhattan's skyline like a golden spear, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the morning sun across the bustling city below. Inside the executive boardroom, chaos reigned, despite the polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers that spoke of unimaginable wealth. Amir Al Farouk, the 42-year-old Arab billionaire whose empire spanned 3 continents, paced frantically behind his mahogany desk, his usually pristine Armani suit wrinkled from stress. His dark eyes, which had intimidated world leaders and corporate giants, now showed something rarely seen: desperation. "So where the hell is Martinez?" he barked into his gold-plated phone, his accent thick with frustration. "The Japanese delegation arrives in 20 minutes, and without a translator, I'm finished." His assistant, trembling slightly, approached with another phone call. "Sir, there's been an accident on the highway. Your interpreter won't make it." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic far below. Today's meeting wasn't just another business deal. It was the culmination of 3 years of negotiations that would either secure his company's expansion into the Asian market or result in the loss of everything he'd built since arriving in America with nothing but ambition and a worn suitcase. Suddenly, the sound of security guards shouting echoed from the hallway. "Hey, you can't go in there!" The boardroom doors burst open, and through the gap slipped a small figure, a girl no older than 12, her clothes torn and dirty, her dark hair matted against her pale face. Her bare feet left small prints on the pristine marble as she stood frozen, taking in the opulent surroundings with wide, apart, intelligent eyes. "Security!" Amir shouted, but something in the girl's gaze made him pause. She wasn't looking at the wealth around her with greed or awe. She was analyzing, calculating, understanding. This was Isabella, and she was about to change everything. Isabella's stomach growled audibly in the silent boardroom, a sound that seemed to echo off the marble walls like a gunshot. She clutched her thin jacket closer to her body, her eyes darting between the dozen men in expensive suits who stared at her, with a mixture of shock and disgust. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just looking for food. The kitchen downstairs, for they said maybe—" Amir's security chief, a burly man named Rodriguez, stepped forward menacingly. "Sir, I'll have her removed immediately. I don't know how she got past the metal detectors." But Amir raised his hand, something about the girl's presence nagging at his consciousness. She didn't belong here, that much was obvious. Her clothes were little more than rags. Her shoes had holes that revealed bruised toes. And yet, there was something in her posture, in the way she held herself despite her obvious fear, that spoke of hidden strength. "Wait," Amir said, studying her more carefully. "How did you get up here, child?" Isabella's chin lifted slightly, a spark of defiance flickering in her brown eyes. "I took the service elevator. I know this building. I've been watching it for weeks." She paused, then added quietly, "I know you're in trouble." The boardroom erupted in nervous laughter from Amir's associates. Marcus Webb, his chief financial officer, shook his head in disbelief. "Sir, we really don't have time for this. The Japanese delegation will be here any moment." Amir's phone buzzed with another text from his assistant. Yamamoto-san's car just pulled up to the building. The color drained from Amir's face. Kenji Yamamoto, the CEO of Sunrise Technologies, controlled the largest tech manufacturing network in Asia. This deal would secure contracts worth $12 billion over 5 years, enough to establish Al Farouk Industries as a global powerhouse. Without it, his competitors would swoop in like vultures, and the company he'd built from nothing would crumble. "Get me every available translator in the city," he commanded his assistant. "I don't care what it costs." "Sir," his assistant replied nervously, "I've already tried. It's impossible on such short notice. The UN is in session, and every qualified Japanese interpreter is booked." Isabella watched the scene unfold with growing understanding. She saw the perspiration beading on Amir's forehead despite the air conditioning, noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he ran them through his black hair, observed the way his associates exchanged worried glances when they thought he wasn't looking. "Excuse me," she said softly, but her voice was lost in the commotion of frantic phone calls and heated discussions about rescheduling. "Excuse me," she said louder, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to the small girl who had somehow commanded their attention with nothing more than her voice. Amir looked down at her, irritation flashing across his features. "Child, I appreciate your concern, but this is not the time. Rodriguez, please escort her." "I can help you," Isabella interrupted, her voice steady now, filled with a confidence that seemed impossible given her circumstances. "Help?" Marcus Webb laughed harshly. "Little girl, this is a multi-billion-dollar negotiation with one of the most powerful men in Japan. What could you possibly— Wait, I speak Japanese," Isabella said simply, fluently. The laughter died instantly. Amir stared at her, searching her face for any sign of delusion or lies. That's impossible. You're just a child. A homeless child." Isabella's eyes hardened, and for a moment, Amir saw something that reminded him of himself, the fierce determination of someone who had been underestimated their entire life. "I speak 6 languages fluently," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Japanese, Mandarin, Spanish, French, German, and English. I also understand Portuguese and Italian, though I'm not as comfortable speaking them." The boardroom erupted in disbelief. Someone actually snorted with laughter. Rodriguez stepped forward again, clearly thinking the girl had lost her mind, but Amir held up his hand once more. There was something in her eyes, a depth of knowledge that seemed impossible for someone so young, especially someone living on the streets. But more than that, there was desperation there too, though not the same kind that plagued him. Her desperation was deeper, more fundamental. The desperation of someone fighting for survival itself. His phone buzzed again. The elevator was ascending. The elevator chimed softly in the distance, its sound cutting through the tense silence like a death knell. Amir's heart pounded as he realized he had perhaps 90 seconds before Kenji Yamamoto and his delegation would walk through those doors, expecting to conduct the most important negotiation of both their careers. "This is insane," Marcus Webb muttered, loosening his tie nervously. "Sir, you cannot seriously be considering—" "Prove it," Amir said suddenly, his piercing gaze fixed on Isabella. The girl straightened under his scrutiny, her small frame seeming to grow taller despite her obvious hunger and exhaustion. Without hesitation, Isabella began to speak, her voice transforming as she switched between languages with fluid precision. "Konnichiwa, Yamamoto-san. Watashi wa Al-Faruq-san no Togi desu. Honjitsu wa o isogashii-san. Ojikan o itadaki, arigatou gozaimasu." Her Japanese was flawless, the formal business dialect precise and respectful. She continued seamlessly. "Buenos días, señor Yamamoto. Es un honor conocerle, y esperamos que nuestra reunión sea muy productiva para ambas empresas." The Spanish flowed like silk, then French. "Bonjour, monsieur Yamamoto. Nous sommes ravis de cette opportunité de collaboration entre nos deux entreprises internationales." German followed. "Guten Tag, Herr Yamamoto. Wir freuen uns sehr über diese Möglichkeit der geschäftlichen Zusammenarbeit." And finally, Mandarin. "Zhao Shanghao, Shanben Xiansheng. 我们很高兴能有机会讨论我们两家公司之间的合作." The boardroom had fallen into stunned silence. Even Rodriguez, who had been reaching for Isabella's arm, stood frozen with his mouth slightly open. The pronunciation was perfect, the formal business terminology exact, and the cultural nuances precisely observed. Marcus Webb's face had gone pale. How is that possible? Isabella's stomach growled again, reminding everyone of her desperate situation, but her voice remained steady. "Languages are pattern," she said simply. "I've always been good with patterns. And when you're hungry, you learn to listen, really listen, to everything around you." Amir's mind raced. The footsteps in the hallway were getting closer. He could hear the familiar voice of his assistant greeting the Japanese delegation, offering them coffee and making polite conversation that would only last a few more moments. "Where did you learn all this?" he demanded. "The public library," Isabella replied. "They have language learning programs on their computers, and I've been sleeping near the Japanese consulate for months. I hear the conversations. I pick up the patterns." She paused, then added with brutal honesty, "When you don't have anywhere else to go, you have a lot of time to learn." Something twisted in Amir's chest, a recognition he didn't want to acknowledge. He remembered his own nights spent studying by streetlight after arriving in America, too proud to admit he couldn't afford proper accommodation, too determined to fail. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through the intercom, barely concealing panic. Mr. Yamamoto and his delegation are approaching the boardroom. The decision hung in the air like a sword: trust a homeless child with the future of his empire, or face certain financial ruin. Amir looked at Isabella, really looked at her for the first time. Beneath the dirt and desperation, he saw intelligence that burned like fire. More than that, he saw hunger, not just for food, but for opportunity, for respect, for a chance to prove her worth. "And what do you want in return?" he asked quietly. Isabella's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected to get this far. "Food," she said immediately. Then her voice grew smaller. "And maybe a chance to prove that I'm more than what people see when they look at me." The words hit Amir like a physical blow. How many times had he felt exactly the same way? How many boardrooms had he entered where people saw only his accent, his foreign name, his outsider status? The footsteps stopped outside the door. "Gentlemen," Amir announced to his shocked associates, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity, "I'd like you to meet our new interpreter." The boardroom doors opened, and Kenji Yamamoto stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the room and settling on the impossible sight of a homeless girl standing beside the Arab billionaire who controlled one of America's fastest-growing empires. Kenji Yamamoto paused in the doorway, his sharp black eyes taking in the scene before him, with the calculated precision of a man who had built his fortune on reading people and situations in milliseconds. At 55, he commanded respect through decades of flawless business instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. Behind him, his three-person delegation, 2 senior executives and his personal assistant, formed a perfect line, their expressions carefully neutral as they observed the unexpected tableau. They had flown 12 hours from Tokyo for this meeting, and the sight of a disheveled child standing in what should have been a sterile, professional environment was not what they had anticipated. "Al-Farouk-san," Yamamoto said slowly in accented English, his voice carrying the weight of polite confusion, "I was not aware we would have additional participants in today's negotiation." Isabella stepped forward before Amir could respond, and the transformation was instantaneous and breathtaking. Gone was the frightened, hungry child who had burst through the doors moments before. In her place stood someone who seemed to understand instinctively the gravity of the moment and the cultural nuances required to navigate it successfully. She bowed precisely, not too deep, which would suggest subservience, but exactly the right angle to show respect, while maintaining professional dignity. When she straightened, her voice carried the formal, respectful tone that Japanese business culture demanded. "Yamamoto-san, hajimemashite. Watashi wa Isabella to moshimasu. Al-Farouk-san no tsuyaku o tsutome sasete itadakimasu. Kyou wa ogisogashii naka, okyakusama to no kaigi no kikai o itadaki, kokoro yori kansha itashite orimasu." The effect on Yamamoto was immediate and visible. His eyebrows rose slightly, the most emotion he had shown since entering the room. Isabella had not just introduced herself as an interpreter, she had done so with the perfect level of formal business Japanese, acknowledging the honor of the meeting and expressing gratitude for his valuable time in exactly the way cultural protocol demanded. "Anata no Nihongo wa taihen jouzu desu ne," Yamamoto replied, genuine surprise creeping into his voice. "Your Japanese is excellent. Arigatou gozaimasu. Nihongo o benkyou suru koto ga totemo tanoshii desu," Isabella responded seamlessly, then immediately switched to English for the benefit of the others in the room. "Mr. Yamamoto expresses that he finds my Japanese proficiency satisfactory." Amir felt something shift in his chest, a mixture of relief and something else he couldn't quite identify. Pride, perhaps, though why he should feel proud of this stranger's accomplishments, he couldn't say. Marcus Webb cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should begin the meeting." His voice carried barely concealed anxiety. $12 billion hung in the balance, and they were trusting it all to a homeless girl who had literally broken into their building. Yamamoto's senior executive, a stern-faced man named Tanaka, leaned forward and spoke rapidly in Japanese, his tone clearly skeptical. "Yamamoto-san, kono ko wa hontou ni shigoto ni tekishita no deshoka? Kona daiji na kaigi ni kodomo o tsukaten mo ii no deshoka?" The question was pointed and challenging, essentially asking whether a child was really appropriate for such an important business meeting. Every eye in the room turned to Isabella, waiting to see how she would handle this first real test. Isabella's expression didn't change, but Amir noticed her hands clench slightly at her sides. She understood that she was being questioned, challenged, dismissed before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. When she responded, her voice carried a new steel beneath the respectful formality. Tanaka-san no go shinpai wa mottomo da to omoimasu. Watashi wa wakai desu ga, kono kaigi no juyosei o jubun rikai shite orimasu. Al-Faruq-san to Yamamoto-san no ryosha ni totte, kono torihiki ga dore hodo taisetsu ka o wakatte imasu. Watashi no yakuwari wa ryosha no iken to kangai o seikaku ni tsuteru koto desu. She then turned to address the room in English, her translation precise but diplomatic. Mr. Tanaka expresses natural concern about the importance of today's meeting. I have assured him that I understand the significance of this negotiation for both Al-Faruq Industries and Sunrise Technologies, and that my role is to ensure accurate communication between both parties. What she didn't translate was the subtle way she had acknowledged Tanaka's concern while simultaneously asserting her competence, or how she had demonstrated her understanding of the business stakes involved. Yamamoto noticed, though. His slight nod indicated approval of both her linguistic skills and her diplomatic handling of a potentially awkward moment. "Shall we proceed?" Amir asked, gesturing toward the conference table. His voice was steady, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Everything he had worked for was riding on the next few hours. As they took their seats, Isabella positioned herself strategically where she could see both parties clearly. She had noticed something during her weeks of observing the building. Amir had a tell when he was nervous. His left hand would tap silently against his leg, a gesture so subtle that most people missed it entirely. Right now, that hand was practically vibrating. Yamamoto opened a leather portfolio and removed several documents, his movements deliberate and precise. "Al-Faruq-san, I believe we should begin with the production capacity requirements for the North American market." Isabella immediately began translating, but as she did, she noticed something that made her heart skip. Yamamoto's documents contained technical specifications written in a mixture of Japanese and English, with notes scrawled in what appeared to be shorthand. The numbers and terminology were complex: manufacturing quotas, quality control standards, logistic specifications that would require not just language skills, but technical understanding. As Yamamoto began to speak about production timelines, Isabella realized this was going to be far more challenging than simple conversation. The Japanese businessman was using highly technical language, industry-specific terms that wouldn't be found in any standard language learning program. "Genshuku ni moshimasu ga," Yamamoto was saying, "Warware no seizo kiyoryoku wa tsuki ni 75 man unit no saishin gijutsu o yokyū shimasu. Kore wa AI togo sareta processor to 5G Taiyo no Sekyu chip o fukumu kokina seihin desu." Isabella's mind raced. He was discussing monthly production capacity of 75,000 units, incorporating AI-integrated processors and 5G-compatible communication chips. This wasn't just business Japanese. This was cutting-edge technology terminology that required understanding of both languages and industries. She took a breath and began translating, her voice steady. "Mr. Yamamoto emphasizes that their manufacturing partnership would require monthly production capacity of 75,000 units of advanced technology. This includes high-end products incorporating AI-integrated processors and 5G-compatible communication chips." Amir's eyes sharpened with interest, but Isabella saw something else there too, a question. He was wondering how a homeless girl could possibly understand such technical concepts. The truth was, Isabella had spent countless hours not just learning languages, but absorbing everything she could from the technology discussions that surrounded the building. The Japanese consulate was located in the same complex as several tech companies, and she had become an inadvertent expert on industry terminology, simply through months of careful listening. Yamamoto nodded approvingly and continued, launching into a detailed explanation of quality control standards and international shipping logistics. As he spoke, Isabella found herself not just translating words, but interpreting the underlying business implications and cultural nuances that could make or break the negotiation. But as the discussion grew more complex, she began to notice something troubling. Amir's responses, while intelligent, weren't addressing some of the subtler concerns that Yamamoto was expressing in Japanese. There were cultural expectations and unstated requirements that were getting lost in translation, not because of language barriers, but because of cultural ones. Isabella faced a choice. She could simply translate word for word, doing the job she had been asked to do. Or she could risk everything by going beyond translation to actually help both parties understand what the other truly needed. The hungry girl who had broken into the building an hour ago might have played it safe, but the young woman who was discovering her own potential in this moment decided to take a different path. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as Yamamoto leaned back in his chair, his expression growing increasingly reserved. Isabella could see the subtle signs of his growing discomfort, the way his fingers drummed once against the table, the slight tightening around his eyes, the formal politeness that was becoming more pronounced with each exchange. "Al-Farouk-san," Yamamoto said carefully in Japanese, his tone measured but carrying an undertone that Isabella immediately recognized as concern. "Watashi tachi no kosho wa juyo desu ka? Bunka teki narikai to shinrai kankei no kochiku ga motto mo taisetsu da to kangaete imasu. Amerika no kigyo to no kyoryoku ni wa tokubetsu na hairyo ga hitsuyo desu." Isabella paused for a moment, recognizing the deeper meaning behind his words. He wasn't just discussing business logistics. He was expressing concern about cultural understanding and trust building, specifically mentioning special considerations required when working with American companies. It was a diplomatic way of saying he was having doubts about whether this partnership would work. She translated the surface meaning, "Mr. Yamamoto emphasizes that while our negotiations are important, he believes cultural understanding and building trust relationships are most crucial. He mentions that cooperation with American companies requires special consideration." But then Isabella did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She continued speaking, addressing both men directly. "However, I believe Mr. Yamamoto is expressing a concern that goes deeper than the technical specifications we've been discussing. In Japanese business culture, there's a concept called ningen kankei, human relationships, that forms the foundation of all successful partnerships. Mr. Yamamoto is questioning whether that foundation has been established here." Amir's eyes sharpened, and Isabella saw understanding dawn across his features. Yamamoto's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise, not just at her cultural insight, but at her decision to address the unspoken tension directly. "Furthermore," Isabella continued, her voice gaining confidence, "there's another concept that's relevant here, omotenashi, which roughly translates to exceptional hospitality or service, but it really means anticipating needs before they're expressed." She looked directly at Amir. "Mr. Yamamoto hasn't said this directly, but I believe he's concerned that the partnership proposal focuses heavily on what Al-Farouk Industries needs from Sunrise Technologies, without sufficiently addressing what unique value will be provided in return." The boardroom fell silent. Marcus Webb looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Several of Amir's other associates exchanged nervous glances. Isabella had just stepped far beyond the role of a translator and into something closer to business consulting. Yamamoto studied Isabella with new interest, then spoke directly to her in Japanese. "Anata wa hijou ni surudoi kansatsu ryoku omote irashaimasu. Watashi no kangae o yoku rikai shite kudasatte imasu. Demo, kore wa Al-Farouk-san ni totte wa komatta koto janai desho ka?" Isabella felt her cheeks warm slightly. Yamamoto was acknowledging her insight, but questioning whether her directness might cause problems for Amir. It was a test, she realized. He wanted to see how she would handle divided loyalties. "Yamamoto-san is observing that I have sharp insight and understand his thoughts well," she translated, then looked directly at Amir. "He's also asking whether my directness might create difficulties for you, Mr. Al-Farouk." Amir was quiet for a long moment, studying both Isabella and Yamamoto. Isabella could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the risk of allowing a homeless girl to continue steering this crucial negotiation against the clear value she was providing. "Isabella," he said finally, "what do you think Mr. Yamamoto needs to hear?" It was a question that carried enormous weight. He was essentially asking her to diagnose the problems with his business approach and recommend solutions, a responsibility that would intimidate most professional consultants, let alone a 12-year-old girl who had been homeless an hour ago. Isabella took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts, Mr. Yamamoto's company has been approached by dozens of American firms seeking partnerships. Most of them focus on what they can gain: access to Japanese manufacturing expertise, quality standards, market penetration in Asia. But from what I've observed, Sunrise Technologies doesn't just want a business partner. They want a relationship built on mutual respect and shared innovation. She turned to address Yamamoto directly in Japanese. Yamamoto-san, Alfaruk-san no kaisha, watada no bijinesu patona de wa naku, shin no kyoryokusha to naritai to omotteimasu. Kare no gijutsu teki shimpo to sozo ryoku wa, anata gata no seizo gijutsu to awaseru koto de, atarashii kanosei o umu koto ga dekiru to shinjimasu. Then in English, I've told Mr. Yamamoto that Alfaruk Industries doesn't seek to be merely a business partner, but a true collaborator, and that your technological innovation and creativity, combined with their manufacturing expertise, could create new possibilities. Yamamoto leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued. Kadona atarashi kanose desu ka? What kind of new possibilities? Isabella looked at Amir as a question in her eyes. She was about to venture into territory that required her to understand not just his current business, but his vision for the future. Amir gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Alfaruk Industries has been developing proprietary software for smart city infrastructure, Isabella began, switching smoothly between languages to ensure both parties understood every nuance. The technology focuses on energy efficiency and sustainable urban development. However, the hardware required to implement these systems at scale has been prohibitively expensive when sourced from traditional suppliers. She continued, her voice growing more confident. What Mr. Al-Farouk envisions is not just a manufacturing partnership, but a collaboration where Sunrise Technologies' production capabilities could be combined with his software innovations to create integrated smart city solutions that could be deployed globally. This wouldn't just be about producing existing technology more efficiently. It would be about creating entirely new products that neither company could develop alone. Yamamoto's eyes lit up with genuine interest. This was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that appealed to Japanese business philosophy. The idea of creating something new and valuable rather than simply competing on price or efficiency. Kore wa totemo kyomi bukai teian desu, Yamamoto said thoughtfully. This is a very interesting proposal. Demo, gijutsu teki na shosai yajitsugen kanosei ni tsuite motto kuwashiku ukagaitai to omoimasu. Mr. Yamamoto expresses strong interest, but would like more detailed information about the technical aspects and feasibility. Isabella translated, then looked at Amir with something approaching excitement. I think you need to show him the prototype. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella had no way of knowing whether such a prototype even existed. But something in Amir's earlier desperation, combined with the specific way he had spoken about the stakes of this meeting, suggested that he had more than just theoretical concepts to offer. Amir was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. How had this girl, this homeless child who had broken into his building looking for food, managed to not only navigate the complex cultural and linguistic requirements of this negotiation, but actually identify the core value proposition that he had been struggling to articulate for months? The prototype, he said slowly, is in the secured development lab. It's never been shown to anyone outside the company. Then, perhaps, Isabella said quietly, today would be an excellent day to change that policy. Marcus Webb finally found his voice. Sir, the security protocols alone, and the intellectual property concerns. But Yamamoto was already speaking, his tone carrying new energy. Al-Farouk-san, Moshi anata ga watashi tachi ni sono gijutsu o misete kudasaru nara, kore wa watashi tachi no kankei ni totte okina shinpo ni naru to omoimasu. Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown since entering the boardroom. Mr. Yamamoto says that if you're willing to show them the technology, it would represent a major step forward in the relationship between your companies. The room was electric with possibility. What had started as a desperate attempt to salvage a failing negotiation had transformed into something entirely different, a genuine meeting of minds and visions. But Isabella also sensed something else in the room, the growing realization among Amir's associates that a homeless girl had just accomplished something that their expensive consultants and business strategists had failed to achieve. The mixture of admiration and unease in their expressions told her that this moment, regardless of how the business negotiation concluded, would mark a turning point in her own life. The secured development lab occupied an entire floor of the Al Farouk Tower, accessible only through biometric scanners and multiple security checkpoints. As the group made their way through the building's inner sanctum, Isabella felt the weight of every eye upon her. The contrast was surreal, her torn clothing and bare feet against the backdrop of cutting-edge technology and corporate power. "So I still think this is madness," Marcus Webb muttered under his breath as they approached the final security door. "Bringing an outsider into our most sensitive research facility." Amir's hand hovered over the biometric scanner, and Isabella could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. This was uncharted territory for him too. In his 15 years of building Al Farouk Industries, he had never made a decision this impulsive, this risky. Everything in his careful, calculated business approach screamed against what he was about to do. But then he looked at Isabella, really looked at her, and saw something that reminded him of his own journey, the fierce intelligence burning behind eyes that had seen too much hardship too young, the quiet desperation of someone fighting not just for opportunity, but for the chance to prove their worth to a world that had already written them off. "Yamamoto-san," he said in careful English, "what you're about to see represents 3 years of development and over $50 million in research investment. I'm sharing this with you because Isabella has helped me understand something important, that true partnerships require trust, not just contracts." The scanner accepted his biometric data with a soft chime, and the reinforced doors slid open to reveal a laboratory that looked like something from a science fiction film. Holographic displays floated in midair, showing complex 3D models of urban infrastructure. Banks of servers hummed quietly along the walls, their lights blinking in synchronized patterns. In the center of the space stood what could only be described as a miniature city, a scale model covering nearly 100 square feet, complete with tiny buildings, streets, and an intricate network of sensors and connections. Isabella gasped involuntarily. Despite all her careful observation of the building's exterior, she had never imagined anything like this existed within its walls. Yamamoto and his delegation moved forward with the measured excitement of people who understood exactly what they were seeing. "Kore wa subarashi," Yamamoto breathed, his usual composure cracking slightly. "This is magnificent." "The model represents a 10-square block section of downtown Manhattan," Amir explained, his voice gaining confidence as he moved into familiar territory. "Every building, every street, every piece of infrastructure is equipped with our integrated sensor network." He gestured to a control panel, and the model came alive. Tiny lights began moving through the streets like vehicles. The buildings glowed with different colors indicating energy usage, and holographic displays showed real-time data streaming from hundreds of monitoring points. The system monitors everything: air quality, energy consumption, traffic flow, waste management, even pedestrian movement patterns. But more than just monitoring, it actively optimizes. "Watch this." Amir input a command, and suddenly one section of the model began changing. Streetlights dimmed and brightened in sequence, traffic light timing adjusted automatically, and building systems responded to environmental changes in real time. When the system detects high pollution levels in one area, it automatically adjusts traffic routing to reduce vehicle emissions. If energy demand spikes in one district, it can redistribute power from areas of lower usage. During emergencies, it can coordinate evacuation routes and emergency services response with mathematical precision. Isabella watched Yamamoto's face carefully, reading the subtle expressions that indicated his growing excitement. His questions in Japanese were becoming more rapid and technical. "Kono shistemu no setsuzoku sei wa donate iru no desu ka? Saiko dosa jikan wa dono kurai desu ka?" Mr. Yamamoto is asking about the system's connectivity architecture and maximum operational time, Isabella translated, then added her own observation. "But I think his real question is about scalability, whether this could work for an entire city, not just a few blocks." Amir smiled, the first genuine smile Isabella had seen from him all day. "That's exactly the right question. The current model handles real-time processing for the equivalent of about 100,000 people. But the architecture is designed to be modular and expandable." He led them to another section of the lab, where larger displays showed theoretical implementations. Tokyo, New York, London, Dubai We've run simulations for major cities worldwide. The key is the manufacturing scale for the sensor networks and processing units. Current suppliers can't produce the hardware we need at the volume and price points that would make citywide implementation feasible. Isabella saw the moment when understanding clicked for Yamamoto. His eyes widened slightly as he grasped the full implication of what Amir was proposing. This wasn't just about a business partnership. It was about the possibility of fundamentally changing how cities operated around the world. Sunrise Technologies no Seizo no Ryoku, to Al-Faruq Industries no Gijutsu o awaseru to, Yamamoto said slowly. Sekai-ju no toshi ni kono shistemu o teikyo dekiru kanosei ga aru toyu koto desu ne. Isabella felt her heart racing as she translated. Mr. Yamamoto is saying that combining Sunrise Technologies, manufacturing capabilities with Al-Faruq Industries, technology could make it possible to provide this system to cities worldwide. But then Yamamoto continued, his tone becoming more serious. Demon kono yona okisa no projecto ni wa hijou ni okina risku mo tomonaimasu. Shippai sureba, ryosha ni totte kaimeteki na dageki to naru desho. The room fell quiet as Isabella translated. However, a project of this magnitude would also carry enormous risks. If it failed, it could be devastating for both companies. Isabella watched as doubt crept back into the faces around her. This was the critical moment, the point where vision would either transform into commitment or collapse under the weight of practical concerns. She thought about her own situation just hours ago, standing in the cold outside this very building, dismissed by everyone who saw her as nothing more than a homeless nuisance. She thought about all the times she had been told that her dreams were too big, her circumstances too limiting, her background too poor to amount to anything significant. "Mr. Yamamoto," she said, her voice clear and determined, "may I ask you something directly?" Both men turned to her with surprise. Yamamoto nodded slowly. What was the biggest risk Sunrise Technologies ever took? Yamamoto considered the question carefully before responding in Japanese. 30 年前、私の父が会社を始めた時、誰も日本の小さな会社が世界的な技術企業になるとは思わなかった。すべての人がリスクが大きすぎるわと言った。でも、父は真のリスクは何もしないことだと言った。Isabella felt goosebumps rise on her arms as she translated, 30 years ago when his father started the company, no one believed a small Japanese firm could become a global technology leader. Everyone said, the risk is too great. But his father said, and the real risk is doing nothing. She paused, then continued with growing conviction. Mr. Yamamoto, I've spent months watching this building from the outside, seeing the people who work here, observing the energy and innovation that flows through these walls. Al-Faruq Industries wasn't built by playing it safe, and neither was Sunrise Technologies. Isabella walked closer to the model city, its lights painting patterns of possibility across her face. 3 hours ago, you could have made a safe, conventional manufacturing deal. Steady profits, minimal risk, predictable outcomes. But that's not why you flew 12 hours to be here. You came because you sensed the possibility of something extraordinary. She turned to face both men directly. Every revolution in human progress has required someone to take a risk that seemed impossible to others. The question isn't whether this is risky. Of course it is. The question is whether the potential to change the world is worth the courage it takes to try. The laboratory fell completely silent, except for the quiet humming of computers and the soft glow of the model city between them. Isabella had just delivered what amounted to a business strategy presentation to 2 billionaires, and she was still wearing clothes she had pulled from a donation bin. Yamamoto stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh, not the dismissive laughter that had greeted her earlier, but genuine appreciation for her audacity and insight. Al-Faruq-san, he said finally in English, his accent thick but his meaning crystal clear, I think you have found more than an interpreter today. The atmosphere in the laboratory had shifted dramatically. What began as a desperate business meeting had transformed into something approaching a meeting of minds, with Isabella standing at the center of it all like an unlikely catalyst for change. But as the initial excitement of possibility settled, the practical realities began to surface. Tanaka, Yamamoto's senior executive, who had initially questioned Isabella's presence, stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. His expression was serious as he began speaking rapidly in Japanese. Yamamoto-san, kono gijutsu wa tashika ni subarashi desu ga. 実現にはたくさんの問題があります。規制、安全性、プライバシー、そして何よりもコストの問題です。Isabella felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the shift in tone. Tanaka was raising the hard questions: regulation, safety, privacy, and cost concerns that could kill even the most innovative projects. Mr. Tanaka is acknowledging the impressive technology, but pointing out significant implementation challenges, Isabella translated carefully. He's specifically concerned about regulatory approval, safety standards, privacy issues, and cost factors. Marcus Webb seized on this opening, his nervousness about the entire situation finally finding an outlet. Exactly. We're talking about sensor networks that would monitor every aspect of city life. The privacy implications alone would trigger massive public resistance, not to mention regulatory nightmares in every major market. Isabella watched as the energy in the room began to deflate. This was how dreams died, she realized, not in dramatic failures, but in the slow strangulation of practical objections and risk-averse thinking. But Amir surprised everyone by stepping forward with renewed determination. Those are exactly the challenges that make this partnership so crucial, he said, addressing both Tanaka and his own team. Al Farouk Industries has the technology, but implementing it globally requires more than just manufacturing capability. It requires the kind of international credibility and regulatory expertise that Sunrise Technologies has built over 3 decades. He gestured toward the model city, its light still painting patterns of possibility across the laboratory walls. Every transformative technology faces these same obstacles. The internet, smartphones, GPS navigation, all of them required overcoming privacy concerns, regulatory hurdles, and cost barriers. The companies that succeeded weren't the ones that avoided these challenges, but the ones that solved them. Isabella found herself studying Yamamoto's face intently, reading the subtle micro-expressions that would indicate which direction his thinking was heading. She noticed the slight tightening around his eyes when cost was mentioned, the way his fingers drummed once against his leg when privacy concerns were raised. But there was something else there too, a flicker of the same excitement she had seen when he first viewed the technology demonstration. "Yamamoto-san," Isabella said suddenly, her voice cutting through the growing debate between the technical teams, "may I share an observation?" Every conversation stopped. The room turned to face the young girl, who had somehow positioned herself at the center of a multi-billion-dollar negotiation. "I've been listening very carefully to everyone's concerns," she continued, "and I noticed something interesting. Every objection being raised has already been solved by other technologies. Privacy protection exists in current banking systems. Regulatory approval processes exist for telecommunications networks. Cost reduction through scale manufacturing is Sunrise Technologies' core expertise." She walked closer to the model, her bare feet silent on the laboratory floor. The real question isn't whether these problems can be solved. It's whether the vision is compelling enough to justify solving them. Isabella turned to address Yamamoto directly in Japanese. "Yamamoto-san, anata ga wakai koro, denwa ya computer ga fukyu suru mae, hitobito wa sorera no gijutsu ni mo onaji yona fuan o motte imashita. Demo ima de wa sorera wa watashi tachi no nichijo seikatsu ni nakuneha naranai mono ni natte imasu." Then in English, I reminded Mr. Yamamoto that when he was young, before phones and computers became widespread, people had the same concerns about those technologies. But now they're indispensable parts of our daily lives. Yamamoto nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "You are saying that today's impossibility becomes tomorrow's necessity." "Exactly," Isabella replied. "But more than that, I'm saying that the companies bold enough to bridge that gap become the leaders who define the future." She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say next. "There's something else I've noticed from listening to both of your companies' histories. Al Farouk Industries succeeded because Mr. Al Farouk was willing to take risks that others avoided. Sunrise Technologies became a global leader because Mr. Yamamoto's father saw possibilities that others dismissed as impossible." Isabella's voice grew stronger. "What I see in this room right now is 2 companies that built their success on courage and vision, suddenly becoming afraid of the very qualities that made them great." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella had essentially accused 2 of the world's most successful businessmen of losing their nerve, and she was doing it as a homeless 12-year-old girl wearing donated clothes. Marcus Webb looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Several of Amir's other associates were staring at Isabella with expressions ranging from admiration to horror, but Yamamoto was smiling. The first genuine smile Isabella had seen from him all day. "Anata wa totemo yuki no aru shoujo desu ne," he said with obvious appreciation. "You are a very brave young lady." "Brave or foolish," Isabella replied in Japanese with a slight smile of her own. "Brave people and foolish people often do the same things. The difference is in the results." Yamamoto laughed out loud at this, a sound that seemed to break the tension that had been building in the room. "Al-Farouk-san, I must ask, where did you find this remarkable young lady?" "She found us," Amir replied, looking at Isabella with an expression she couldn't quite read. "About 3 hours ago, actually." The surprise on Yamamoto's face was unmistakable. 3 hours, but her understanding of your technology, her business insight. "I've been watching and listening," Isabella said simply. "When you don't have anywhere else to go, you learn to pay attention to everything around you." Tanaka spoke up again, this time with less skepticism in his voice. "Shoujo-san, anata no iken desu ga, kono projecto o jitsugen suru tame ni wa, dono kurai no jikan to shikin ga hitsuyo da to omoimasu ka?" Isabella felt her heart race. Tanaka was asking for her assessment of the timeline and funding required to make the project reality, treating her as a genuine consultant rather than an outsider. "That's an excellent question," she replied, switching to English. "Based on what I've seen of the technology and what I understand about Sunrise Technologies' manufacturing capabilities, I believe we're looking at approximately 18 months for initial city-scale implementation, with total development and deployment costs in the range of $800 million. The room fell silent. Isabella had just provided a specific project timeline and budget estimate without hesitation, and her numbers aligned remarkably closely with the internal projections that Amir's team had developed over months of analysis. "However," she continued, "those numbers assume a traditional development approach. If both companies were willing to commit to true partnership, shared risk, shared development, shared intellectual property, I believe both the timeline and costs could be reduced significantly." Yamamoto leaned back in his chair, studying Isabella with new respect. "What kind of partnership structure do you envision?" Isabella took a deep breath, realizing she was about to venture into territory that would either cement her role in this negotiation or expose her as being in over her head. A joint venture with equal ownership, shared development facilities in both countries, and a commitment to open source certain aspects of the technology to accelerate global adoption and regulatory acceptance. The suggestion was bold to the point of being radical. Most major corporations guarded their intellectual property jealously, and the idea of open sourcing elements of such valuable technology went against every conventional business wisdom. But Isabella had recognized something that the traditional business thinking missed. The greatest barrier to implementing smart city technology wasn't technical or financial, it was trust. Cities and governments were reluctant to adopt systems that would give too much control to any single corporation. "By making parts of the system open and transparent," she explained, "you remove the fear that cities are becoming dependent on proprietary technology they can't understand or control. That alone would accelerate adoption by years and eliminate most regulatory resistance." Yamamoto and Amir exchanged a long look, each recognizing the audacious brilliance of what Isabella was proposing. It was exactly the kind of counterintuitive thinking that had built both of their companies in the first place. The laboratory had taken on an almost electric atmosphere, charged with the kind of possibility that only emerges when brilliant minds recognize a truly transformative idea. But Isabella could see that they were approaching a critical juncture, the moment where abstract concepts would either crystallize into concrete commitments or dissolve into polite expressions of interest that led nowhere. Yamamoto stood and began pacing slowly around the model city, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that Isabella recognized as deep contemplation. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would define the next decade of his company's future. "Al-Farouk-san, what your young advisor is proposing represents the most significant strategic shift Sunrise Technologies has considered since my father's original expansion into international markets." He paused, studying the holographic displays that showed potential global implementations. It is also precisely the kind of bold vision that could establish both our companies as leaders in the next generation of urban infrastructure. Isabella felt her pulse quicken as she translated the nuances that weren't immediately apparent in his English. Mr. Yamamoto is indicating serious interest, but he's also acknowledging that this would represent a fundamental change in how his company operates. In Japanese business culture, this kind of statement suggests he's moved from evaluation to genuine consideration. Amir stepped closer to the model, his eyes reflecting the tiny lights that represented millions of potential lives that could be improved by their technology. Yamamoto-san, I've spent 3 years developing this system because I believe urban centers are the key to humanity's future. By 2050, nearly 70% of the world's population will live in cities. If we can make those cities truly intelligent, not just connected, but responsive and adaptive, we could revolutionize everything from energy consumption to quality of life. His voice gained intensity. But I also know that vision without execution is just dreaming. Sunrise Technologies doesn't just manufacture components. You've built a reputation for turning ambitious concepts into reliable, scalable realities. Isabella watched the interplay between the two men, noting how their individual strengths were becoming apparent. Amir possessed the visionary thinking and technological innovation, while Yamamoto brought the operational excellence and global credibility that could make implementation possible. Tanaka approached with his tablet, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity. Alfaruk-san, kono open source no approach ni tsuite motto kuwashiku setsumei shite itadakemasu ka? Dono yona gijutsu bumon o kokai ni suru koto o kangaete irashaimasu ka? Isabella translated. Mr. Tanaka wants more detailed information about the open source approach, specifically which technological components you would consider making public. It was a crucial question that would determine whether the partnership could actually work. Too much openness could eliminate competitive advantages. Too little could fail to achieve the trust and adoption benefits Isabella had identified. Amir looked at Isabella, a question in his eyes. Somehow, in the space of a few hours, he had come to value her input on decisions that would normally require extensive consultation with his senior team. Isabella took a breath and stepped forward. If I may suggest a framework, the sensor hardware specifications and basic communication protocols should be open source. This allows cities and governments to understand exactly how the system works and ensures they're not locked into proprietary standards. However, the artificial intelligence algorithms that process the data and optimize city functions would remain proprietary to the joint venture. She gestured toward the model. Think of it like the internet itself. The basic protocols are open and standardized, which is why it achieved universal adoption. But the applications and services that run on top of it are where companies create value and competitive advantage. Yamamoto's eyes lit up with understanding. So cities gain transparency and control over the infrastructure, while our partnership maintains the intellectual property that creates ongoing value. Exactly, Isabella replied. And there's another benefit. By open sourcing the hardware standards, you actually create a market for compatible components that other manufacturers could produce under license. Instead of limiting Sunrise Technologies to being the sole supplier, you become the primary supplier in a much larger ecosystem. Marcus Webb finally found his voice again. That's actually brilliant. It transforms potential competition into a revenue stream through licensing fees. Isabella smiled, recognizing that she had successfully addressed the business model concerns that had been underlying much of the hesitation in the room. More importantly, it accelerates global adoption because cities know they're not betting everything on a single supplier. They have options, which reduces their risk and increases their willingness to commit to large-scale implementations. Yamamoto turned to his delegation and spoke rapidly in Japanese. Kore wa watashi tachi ga kongo 10年間にわたって続けられるようなプロジェクトです。リスクは大きいですが、成功すれば私たちの会社の歴史に残る大成功となるでしょう。Isabella felt her heart skip as she translated the significance of his words. Mr. Yamamoto is saying this could be the kind of project they could pursue for the next 10 years. He acknowledges the risks are substantial, but believes success would create a historic achievement for his company. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of what was being discussed. They were no longer talking about a simple manufacturing partnership. They were contemplating a joint venture that could reshape how cities operate worldwide. But Isabella sensed something else in the pause, a lingering hesitation that went beyond practical concerns. Both men were successful precisely because they had learned to be careful, to analyze risks thoroughly before committing to major decisions. "Mr. Yamamoto, Mr. Al-Farouk," she said quietly, "may I share something personal?" Both men nodded, their attention focused entirely on her. "This morning, I woke up in an abandoned building, wondering where my next meal would come from. I had no reason to believe that anything in my life would ever change, that I would ever be anything more than a burden that society wanted to ignore." Her voice grew stronger. "But sometimes, the most extraordinary transformations happen not because the conditions are perfect, but because someone has the courage to see possibility where others see only problems." Isabella walked to stand between the two men, her small frame dwarfed by their presence, but her voice carrying absolute conviction. "You both built your success by taking chances on ideas that others dismissed as impossible. Today, you have the opportunity to do it again, not just for your companies, but for millions of people living in cities around the world." She paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "In 3 hours, I went from being invisible to being heard, from being dismissed to being valued, from having nothing to contribute to helping shape a conversation that could change the world. That happened because someone was willing to see past appearances to possibility." Isabella gestured toward the model city glowing between them. "This technology represents the same kind of transformation for urban centers everywhere. The chance to go from struggling with problems to actively solving them, from being reactive to being intelligent, from accepting limitations to creating possibilities." Her words hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation combined. Isabella had just framed the business decision in deeply personal terms, connecting the partnership to the very qualities that had made both men successful in the first place. Yamamoto studied her face for a long moment, then turned to Amir. "Al-Farouk-san, I believe your young advisor has identified something that our traditional business analysis overlooked. This partnership isn't just about technology or profits. It's about having the courage to create something that doesn't yet exist." Amir nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "And the greatest risk isn't in trying and potentially failing. It's in not trying and definitely never knowing what might have been possible." Isabella felt something shift in the room, the subtle but unmistakable moment when discussion transforms into decision, when possibility begins its journey toward reality. Yamamoto extended his hand toward Amir. "I believe it's time to stop talking about what might be possible and start planning how to make it actual." As the two men shook hands, Isabella realized she had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the birth of a business partnership, but the moment when vision became commitment, when two successful men chose courage over caution, and when a homeless girl's insights had helped shape a decision that could impact millions of lives. The handshake between Amir and Yamamoto seemed to unleash a flood of energy that had been building throughout the afternoon. Suddenly, the laboratory was alive with rapid conversations as technical teams from both companies began discussing implementation timelines, resource allocation, and the 1,000 practical details that would transform their visionary agreement into operational reality. Isabella found herself standing slightly apart from the sudden flurry of activity, watching as the world she had helped create took on a life of its own. The adrenaline that had sustained her through hours of high-stakes negotiation was beginning to ebb, and the physical realities of her situation, the hunger, the exhaustion, the fact that she was still wearing clothes that had come from a donation bin, began to reassert themselves. Marcus Webb approached her with something approaching awe in his expression. "Isabella, what you accomplished today. I've been in corporate strategy for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it." Before Isabella could respond, Yamamoto's voice cut through the conversations around them. "Al-Farouk-san, there is one more matter we must address before we proceed with formal partnership discussions." The room quieted as everyone turned their attention to the Japanese businessman, who was looking directly at Isabella with an expression she couldn't quite read. "This young lady has provided insights and guidance that proved crucial to our reaching this agreement," Yamamoto continued. In Japanese business culture, such contributions create obligations that must be properly acknowledged. Isabella felt her heart start to race, uncertain whether she was about to be thanked or somehow held accountable for the massive commitments that had just been made. Amir stepped closer to where she stood. Yamamoto-san is absolutely right, Isabella. Without your intervention, this meeting would have been a complete failure. You didn't just translate languages, you translated cultures, perspectives, and possibilities that none of us were seeing clearly. Isabella looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that this was merely polite gratitude before he sent her back to the streets. I was just trying to help, she said quietly. You did far more than help, Amir replied. Just you fundamentally changed the trajectory of both our companies. Yamamoto nodded in agreement. The question now is what role you will play as this partnership moves forward. The words hung in the air like an impossible promise. Isabella stared at both men, trying to process what she was hearing. Role? I don't understand. Amir knelt down so he could look directly into her eyes. Isabella, in the past few hours, you've demonstrated business acumen that most people spend decades developing. You understand technology, cultural dynamics, negotiation strategy, and market positioning at a level that frankly astonishes me. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But more than that, you have something that can't be taught, the ability to see possibilities where others see problems, and the courage to act on those insights even when the stakes are enormous. Isabella felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, though she wasn't sure whether they came from hope or fear. Mr. Al-Farouk, I appreciate everything you're saying, but I'm nobody. I don't have education or credentials or... Stop, Amir said firmly. What you did today had nothing to do with credentials and everything to do with intelligence, insight, and courage. Those are qualities you either possess or you don't, and you clearly possess them in abundance. Yamamoto stepped forward. Al-Farouk-san, if I may make a suggestion, this partnership we are creating will require unprecedented coordination between our companies, careful management of cultural differences, and ongoing strategic guidance as we navigate challenges we cannot yet anticipate. He looked directly at Isabella. What we need is someone who understands both the technical and cultural aspects of what we're attempting, someone who can facilitate communication, not just between languages, but between different ways of thinking. Isabella's mind raced as she began to understand what they were suggesting. You're talking about creating a position for me in your companies. More than that, Amir replied. We're talking about creating a role that doesn't currently exist, someone who serves as a cultural and strategic liaison for the partnership itself. Marcus Webb cleared his throat nervously. Sir, with all due respect, Isabella is, well, she's 12 years old. There are legal considerations, educational requirements. Not to mention that she has no permanent address or all of which can be addressed, Amir said with growing conviction. Educational requirements. We'll provide tutoring and access to the best business and technical training available. Legal considerations. We'll establish a guardianship structure that ensures her protection and development. Housing. That's not exactly a challenge for a company that owns half of Manhattan's commercial real estate. Isabella felt the room spinning slightly. The conversation had moved from gratitude to job offer to what sounded like a complete transformation of her entire life, all in the space of a few minutes. But why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do all this for someone you met just a few hours ago? Amir stood and walked to the window that looked out over the city, his silhouette framed against the afternoon skyline. Isabella, do you know what the most valuable resource is in business? Money? She guessed. Talent, he replied. Genuine, transformative talent is so rare that when you encounter it, you do whatever is necessary to nurture and develop it. He turned back to face her. What you demonstrated today isn't something that can be learned from textbooks or developed through training programs. You have an intuitive understanding of how people think, how systems work, and how to find solutions that others miss entirely. Yamamoto nodded in agreement. In Japan, we have a concept called takumi, the relentless pursuit of perfection in one's craft. But before takumi, there must be natural ability, the raw material that makes mastery possible. You possess that raw material in abundance. Isabella looked around the room at the faces of the adults who had suddenly become so invested in her future. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to grab hold of this impossible opportunity before it could disappear. But another part of her was terrified of failing, of not living up to their expectations, of proving that their faith in her was misplaced. "What if I'm not smart enough?" she asked. "What if I can't learn everything I need to know? What if I disappoint you?" Amir smiled, the first completely relaxed, genuine smile she had seen from him. "Isabella, fear of failure is a luxury that successful people can't afford. The question isn't whether you might fail, the question is whether you're willing to try." He gestured toward the model city still glowing between them. "This technology we're developing is designed to help cities become more than they currently are, more efficient, more responsive, more capable of serving their citizens' needs. In a way, that's exactly what we're offering you. The chance to become more than your current circumstances allow." Isabella thought about her morning, waking up cold and hungry in an abandoned building, facing another day of invisibility and rejection. Then she thought about the past few hours, the moment when her linguistic abilities had been recognized, the growing respect in the eyes of some of the world's most successful business people, the incredible feeling of contributing something valuable to decisions that could impact millions of lives. "If I said yes," she said slowly, "what would happen next?" "First, we take care of immediate needs," Amir replied practically. "Food, clothing, medical care and temporary housing while we establish more permanent arrangements. Then," Yamamoto added, "we begin your education, not just formal schooling, but immersion in the business and technical knowledge you'll need to fulfill your role in the partnership. And throughout the process," Amir continued, "you work directly with both our companies as we develop this smart city initiative. You'll be learning while contributing, growing while helping us grow." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, trying to imagine a future so different from anything she had ever envisioned for herself that it seemed like pure fantasy. When she opened them again, she found herself looking at the model city with its thousands of tiny lights representing countless lives that could be improved by the work they were proposing. "Mr. Al-Farouk, Mr. Yamamoto," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "This morning I would have been grateful for a meal. This afternoon, you're offering me a future. I may not know everything I need to know yet, but I know I want to learn, I know I want to contribute, and I know I want to be part of creating something that makes the world better." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Besides, you've already seen what I can accomplish when I'm desperate and determined. Imagine what I might do when I'm educated and empowered." 6 months later, Isabella stood once again in the Al-Farouk Tower boardroom, but everything about this moment was different from that desperate morning when she had burst through the doors looking for food. Now she wore a tailored business suit, her hair professionally styled, and her posture reflected the confidence that came from months of intensive education and real-world experience. But the most significant change wasn't in her appearance. It was in the eyes of everyone around her as they waited for her assessment of what could be the most crucial presentation of their lives. The room was packed beyond capacity. Representatives from 15 major cities sat around the expanded conference table. Mayors, urban planning directors, technology commissioners, and infrastructure specialists from New York, Tokyo, London, Dubai, Singapore, Sao Paulo, and nearly a dozen others. Wall Street analysts occupied chairs along the perimeter, their laptops open and cameras ready to transmit the results of this meeting to markets worldwide. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of development, testing, and preparation. The Al-Farouk Yamamoto Smart Cities Initiative had progressed from concept to working prototype to pilot program at a pace that had surprised even its creators. Small-scale implementations in 3 test cities had produced results that exceeded every projection: 30% reductions in energy consumption, 45% improvements in traffic flow, and emergency response times that had been cut in half. But today was different. Today they were seeking commitments for full-scale citywide implementations that would require investment commitments totaling over $6 billion, the largest coordinated urban infrastructure project in human history. Isabella had spent the morning in final preparation sessions with both Amir and Yamamoto, reviewing technical specifications, financial projections, and implementation timelines. But now, as she looked around the room at faces representing nearly 100 million urban residents, she understood that the success or failure of this moment would depend on something that couldn't be found in spreadsheets or technical manuals. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amir began, his voice carrying the weight of everything they had built together. 6 months ago, Isabella helped us understand that true partnerships require more than contracts. They require trust, shared vision, and the courage to create something that has never existed before. He gestured toward the massive holographic display that now dominated one wall of the boardroom, showing real-time data from their pilot programs. "Today, we're not asking you to trust our promises about what this technology might accomplish. We're asking you to examine the evidence of what it has already achieved." The presentation that followed was comprehensive and compelling. Detailed case studies from the pilot cities, financial analyses showing return on investment, technical specifications demonstrating scalability, and implementation plans that addressed every concern that had been raised during months of preliminary discussions. But as the presentation progressed, Isabella noticed something that the others seemed to be missing. The city representatives were impressed by the results, convinced by the evidence, and satisfied with the technical explanations. But there was still something holding them back, a hesitation that went deeper than practical concerns about cost or implementation complexity. When the formal presentation concluded and the question period began, Isabella realized what she was seeing. These were people who had spent their careers making incremental improvements to existing systems. The idea of fundamentally transforming how cities operated was simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Mayor Chen from Shanghai leaned forward. "The results from your pilot programs are undeniably impressive, but implementing this system citywide represents a level of change that goes beyond urban planning. It's social transformation on a massive scale." Isabella felt the familiar sensation of pieces clicking into place in her mind, the same pattern recognition that had served her so well during that first crucial meeting. She looked at Amir, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "Mayor Chen," Isabella said, rising from her seat, "you're absolutely right. What we're proposing is social transformation, but I'd like to ask all of you a question. What's the alternative?" She moved to stand where everyone could see her clearly. "Every person in this room became a leader because you saw problems that needed solving and had the vision to imagine better solutions. But urban challenges are growing faster than incremental improvements can address them. Climate change, population growth, resource scarcity, inequality. These aren't problems that can be solved by doing what we've always done, just slightly better." Isabella's voice gained strength. 6 months ago, I was a homeless girl whose greatest daily challenge was finding enough food to survive. Today, I'm standing in this room because someone had the courage to see possibility where others saw only problems. The question facing all of you is the same one that faced Mr. Al-Farouk and Mr. Yamamoto. Do you have the courage to see your cities as they could be, rather than accepting them as they are? The silence that followed Isabella's words was profound, filled with the weight of decision that would ripple across continents. Then, slowly, Mayor Chen began to nod. "Miss Isabella," she said with a slight smile, 6 months ago none of us had heard your name. Today you're helping to shape the future of urban civilization. That transformation gives me hope that our cities can change just as dramatically." One by one, around the room, hands began to rise. São Paulo's mayor was first, followed quickly by Dubai's infrastructure commissioner. Within minutes, representatives from 12 of the 15 cities had committed to full implementation, with the remaining 3 requesting additional pilot programs before making final decisions. As contracts were signed and implementation timelines established, Isabella found herself standing once again at the window overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly before her, millions of lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. But now, instead of looking up from the streets with hunger and desperation, she was looking down with purpose and possibility. Amir approached and stood beside her. "Any regrets about the choice you made that day?" Isabella smiled, remembering the terrified girl who had stumbled into this boardroom seeking nothing more than food. "Mr. Al-Farouk, I learned something important over these past 6 months. Transformation isn't about changing who you are. It's about becoming who you were always capable of being." She gestured toward the city below. "In 18 months, the first smart city systems will be fully operational. In 5 years, over 50 cities worldwide will have implemented our technology. In 10 years, the way humans live in urban environments will be fundamentally different because of decisions made in this room." And it all started, Amir observed, with a desperate girl who had the courage to speak 6 languages. Isabella laughed, the sound carrying joy and confidence that would have been impossible to imagine in her former life. No, it started with people who had the wisdom to listen, not just to the languages I could speak, but to the ideas I could contribute. As the last signatures were placed on contracts worth billions of dollars, Isabella understood that she had witnessed something far more significant than a business success. She had seen what became possible when society chose to recognize talent regardless of its packaging, when experience was valued over credentials, and when the courage to envision transformation overcame the comfort of accepting limitations. The girl who had once been invisible had helped make the future visible for millions. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest act of recognition, seeing potential where others see only problems, hearing wisdom where others hear only noise, finding strength where others see only vulnerability. Isabella's journey from invisibility to influence reminds us that talent exists everywhere, often hidden beneath circumstances that society chooses to ignore. Her story challenges us to look beyond appearances, to listen with intention, and to have the courage to act on the possibilities we discover. What talents are hiding in plain sight around you? What voices are waiting to be heard? What transformations are possible if we choose courage over comfort? The next time you encounter someone the world has overlooked, remember Isabella. The person asking for help might be offering exactly what you need most.